Barr's performance. I think his credibility and independence took a very serious self-imposed hit throughout this past month or so by intercepting Robert Mueller's obstruction inquiry, which now, when we see the report, seems pretty clearly to have been intended for Congress, by selectively quoting in his 4-page letter, and really a way that I think we have to just call misleading at best, by doing little favors, by using terms that no prosecutor would ever use, no collusion. Barr said that 5 or 6 times in the press conference yesterday. That is not a legal term. It's not a criminal term. That is a political term. So I think William Barr has badly damaged his legacy. And the breaking news right now, the chairman, Jerry Nadler, has formally issued this subpoena to the Justice Department for the full report. He says the department is required to comply with the subpoena by May 1st. I am open to working with the department to reach a reasonable accommodation for access to these materials. However, I cannot accept any proposal which leaves most of Congress in the dark as they grapple with their duties of legislation oversight and constitutional accountability. And then he adds this: my committee needs as entitled to the full version of the report and the underlying evidence consistent with past practice.
Oh, I agree. There's really no reason why Congress can't see that. And if there's sensitive information, they can view it basically.
Including all the underlying evidence? That would be millions of documents and testimony and hours of conversations.
I think you got to start high and start bargaining a little bit. And traditionally, the department and Congress negotiate over things like this. It's not an all or nothing, absolute refusal. But they're going to have a tough opponent in Barr. I mean, I think he's made it very clear. I'm happy he redacted so little, but on the other hand, it's part of, to me, his overall plan, which is let's put a lot of static out there, color-coded redactions. We're going to do my 4-pager. We're going to do a press conference before people see it. All that to make up for what he felt in a calculated bit of strategy. That stuff's going to come out eventually. I'll put it out there, but let me spin it as much as possible before people see it.
And let's go back to Abby Phillip, who is with the president at Mar-a-Lago. And Abby, it looks as though there's going to be a legal fight here where the executive branch, the Trump administration, and the Justice Department squaring off against the House of Representatives, specifically Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, who has now formally issued a subpoena to obtain the entire Mueller report, including the underlying evidence. Nadler saying that the redactions appear to be significant.
Yeah, and it's not clear to me that the president has a view of the redactions in that sense. I mean, I think that he's pretty happy with what the report shows, and I think he probably believes that even with the redactions, it's not going to reveal anything about him that would be particularly damaging. So as this plays out between the Justice Department and Congressman and Chairman Nadler, I think it's going to play out that way. I'm not sure that the president and his attorneys want to be seen as weighing in on that particular debate. I think where they are going to try to draw the line is any further inquiries that are drawn out of this. I think the argument being made by the president is that if there was not enough evidence to prosecute criminally, then there's no justification for Congress to then take this up in a crusade against him. I think Congress clearly is going to disagree with that. Whether it leads to impeachment or something short of that is a different story. But the president is going to try to make a political argument that there's no there, and that essentially there are no laws being broken. I think we heard one of the president's top allies just in the last hour telling Chris Cuomo that maybe there might be a role for Congress to look into some of these obstruction questions in the future. But at this moment, there's no law being broken. I think that's the position of the president. That's going to be the position of his allies, and they're going to be trying to beat that drum in the public sphere for as long as possible.
And Abby, nothing on his schedule today. We're not going to see him. You're in that press briefing room. Prospects of him showing up and answering reporters' questions appear to be pretty much nil, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty slim. The White House aides had indicated that, that he wasn't expected to say a whole lot. He declined multiple opportunities yesterday to talk to reporters, where in the past he's done that before. When he's here in Florida, he's typically going to his golf course and spending the day on the golf course and tweeting. And I think we're seeing him obviously weighing in via Twitter, but I'm not sure his aides have come up with a good strategy for him to actually talk to reporters. And frankly, frankly, as he is going through all of this and sorting out his own feelings about it, it may be in their best interest to keep him away from reporters for as long as possible, because his mood is shifting pretty dramatically on some of these things, and it hasn't settled out yet. And it might be several days more before they have a real plan for how they really want to address the details of this Mueller report.
You'll stay in touch with us, Abby. Let us know if he does show up at some point. Guys, thanks very much. Obstructing attempts to obstruct. The president's former counsel saves the president from himself. We're digging into all the details of this Mueller report. The House Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, has just issued a subpoena to the Department of Justice for the full Mueller report and all the underlying evidence. Let's go live to Capitol Hill. Our Sunlen Sarfati is joining us from there. It was expected, but he did this very quickly.
That's right, indeed, Wolf. We have known that this is coming for some time, but today it is official. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, officially issuing a subpoena to the Department of Justice. He wants the full unredacted Mueller reports. He also wants the underlying evidence that Robert Mueller used in his investigation. He says in his statement, quote, "The redactions appear to be significant. We have so far seen none of the actual evidence that the special counsel developed to make this case. Even the redacted version of the report outlines serious instances of wrongdoing by President Trump and some of his closest associates. It now falls on Congress to determine the full scope of the alleged misconduct and to decide what steps we must take going forward." And he has given Wolf, the Department of Justice, until May 1st to comply with his request. Wolf.
Sunlen Sarfati, thanks very much. Dramatic developments, Jake, unfolding very quickly in the aftermath of the release of this 400-plus page report.
Absolutely. And the special counsel's report says the president's staff protected the president from himself. Quote, "The president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests." Our team of experts is here. And David Gergen, let me start with you. First, I want to get your reaction to the House Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, issuing the subpoena. It's not a surprise. But what do you think this sets up a court fight between the administration and Congress?
Very likely it's the beginning of a series of court fights. I think the administration clearly has taken the view they don't want to cooperate on any front. They don't have to, and they want to stretch it out if they can. So I think that's true. But the only way to have the full story in front of the Congress is for the members, some group of members, to have access to the full report without the redactions. Because there's a widespread feeling among Democrats, that the Attorney General Barr, in summarizing what was in the report, was very misleading. He misled people on the question of whether there was full cooperation or not. Clearly, there was not full cooperation. The president himself, for example, not testifying or not appearing before the special counsel's office, and also, Barr was just said that basically he gave the president a free pass, and Democrats are saying, wait a minute, on obstruction. The Mueller report's quite clear that there's no free pass. There's no exoneration here in the report. So I think there are elements that, to move this process forward, I think it's important to start employing the various legal avenues that they have to do it. I don't think it ought to be a circus, though. The one thing you do worry about is if everybody on the Hill sees it's going to leak all over the darn place. And there are some things in that report which under the law and under sort of normal processes should be protected. But that means a few people, a gang of 8, for example, should see the fully unredacted report.
The Gang of 8 is 4 top congressional leaders and the 4 heads of the House and Senate Intelligence Committee. Cool.
And the Democrats have to worry right now. What do they do? Do they just go ahead and do all sorts of other issues, or do they formally launch impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives?
Well, I think what we saw this morning is exactly what Nancy Pelosi wants to see happen. Go through the formal channels. Let's let the committee chairman, as she has been successful so far, lead the investigation. The chairman of the Oversight Committee, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the chairman, of course, now of the Judiciary Committee. So the Democrats have the ability to continue this investigation. They have the subpoena power to compel documents. The big rub now is, will the left, the real hard base, will it push Nancy Pelosi into a corner where she has to push forward on impeachment proceedings? Strategically, it's a political loser. I mean, it's an absolute political loser, and the likes of Nancy Pelosi know that. The question is there so much energy on the left right now? that they're going to try to force that hand.
And Sabrina, Democrats are also struggling with the question of obstruction of justice, as you just heard Mark say. One example from the report on what the president asked White House counsel Don McGahn, counsel at the time, to do. Quote, on June 17, 2017, the president called McGahn at home and directed him to call the acting attorney general and say that the special counsel had conflicts of interest and must be removed. McGahn did not carry out the direction, however, deciding that he would resign rather than trigger what he regarded as a potential Saturday night massacre. There are all these examples in this report, at least 10, of potential obstruction of justice. How are Democrats going to deal with this?
Well, I think that what that tells us is that although Mueller himself did not make a determination on whether or not the president obstructed justice, it was not for a lack of trying on Trump's part. The only reason he was unable to succeed is because his own aides or other officials in the administration declined to carry out his orders. So Democrats are now having to deal with whether or not they should go after attempted obstruction. You've already heard some Republicans, Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows were on CNN this morning saying, well, attempted is not obstruction of justice, but that's sort of dismissing other crimes that very much do qualify. If you can't just say that attempted murder is not a crime. And that's going to be one of the, I think, lines that you're going to hear as this political fight really takes shape on Capitol Hill. But what this has also told us is that even though some of these aides did not carry out the president's orders, they were part of building a completely false narrative around both the nature of the contacts between the Trump campaign and Moscow, as well as the president's own response to the investigation. They dismissed as fake news what ultimately turned out to be true in terms of the president's efforts to interfere with the investigation. And so you really got a detailed portrait with names and testimony and contemporaneous notes about the depths of the White House's deception. And I think that's really going to provide a roadmap for Democrats moving forward, even as they sort of tackle the politically challenging question of impeachment.
And David Gergen, the great thing about this 400-plus page report, unlike a book or unlike a long article, there are no anonymous sources here. All the quotes are attributed to real individuals and for significant reasons, except for some of the redacted portion. But significantly, we now know in this report that the president tried to get his White House counsel, Don McGahn, to fire Robert Mueller. McGahn refused. But listen to the president when the New York Times reported all of this back in January of 2018.
Did you fire Robert Mueller? Did you want to fire Robert Mueller?
Fake news, folks. Fake news.
What's your message today?
Typical New York Times fake stories.
What do you think when the president looks at the camera like that? He knows what he did with Don McGahn, according to this report, but then he just says the New York Times fake news.
Listen, I think it fits into an overall pattern, which is as important as whether the president committed crimes or not. It is also important what kind of culture is in the White House. And I think we've had numerous books come out that have sort of been the inside stories about chaos and infighting and lying and all the rest. This is the first time we've had something with people under oath talking about what the culture of that place is like. And it's a very damning picture. And I think one of the real questions for Democrats is not just what can you do legally, but how can you convince the country that the President of the United States, as George Conway argued in his op-ed piece today, for example, that there's a fiduciary responsibility when you're president to preserve that office, the dignity of that office, the respect for that office. And in this case, there's just been rampant lying. There's been rampant pushing at the edges, breaking through, smashing through norms. And at some level, there has to be accountability, and how the Democrats are going to play that. If they just get off in the weeds about court fights, they're going to miss the bigger story.
And there's another accountability question I want to ask you, Mark, which is Sarah Sanders is in the report, the White House press secretary, and Mueller makes it very clear that she made up something that she said. She said she had been getting all these emails and texts from FBI agents who were delighted with the fact that President Trump had fired James Comey. And in the report, it says that was based on nothing. She's out there on TV doubling down, explaining, well, it was a slip of the tongue, even though she repeated it the next day as well, and not apologizing, not being contrite. What's the responsibility of the White House press corps when presented with facts from a respected law enforcement agent that the press secretary lied to the American people and is not apologetic about it at all?
I think we have to acknowledge that we know that she lies from the podium, and others have as well. I mean, well, we have to take a step back. She's actually caught now on paper by someone who's not a journalist, right? So now she's caught in this quandary. Here's the problem right now. We're in this entirely different paradigm, and it's interesting. I had this conversation with a reporter recently, and the reporter said, I remember the days when you would call the White House press office, and if the White House press office told you the lead that you were chasing was wrong, you would say, oh gosh, oh no, you would hang up, you'd go back to your source, you would try to figure it out. You know what I do now? It becomes the third graph of my story because I can never trust what they tell me because whatever they've told me has always been misleading. So that kind of tells you the state of affairs right now. I think the question is, once Trump leaves office, whether that's, whether he wins re-election or he doesn't, does the country come back together in some kind of reality? Because right now, we're not in reality. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that. We're not in reality.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. Following the breaking news, a member of that committee that just issued a subpoena for the full Mueller report and underlying evidence will join us next. Stay with us.
Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler issued a subpoena to see the full unredacted Mueller report. Nadler also calling for the special counsel Robert Mueller to publicly testify before Congress.
The Democrats in Congress are currently gaming out their next moves, but for several, that does not include pursuing impeachment. Congressman Steny Hoyer, the House Majority Leader, says impeachment is, quote, not worthwhile at this point.
Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He serves on the Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. What specifically do you want to see that you're not seeing, at least not yet, as a result of this subpoena?
Well, we want to see everything. In the cases of prior independent special counsels, the entire report with all of the underlying evidentiary materials have been turned over. Remember those scenes of Kenneth Starr turning over the report the day after it came out and bringing a truckload of boxes over to Congress? That's exactly what we want here. We need to see it ourselves. There was one part in the report that jumped out at me where in Volume 1, Mueller writes that there were 2 cases where Trump campaign officials met directly with agents of the Russian government. One we know about, it was the Trump Tower meeting. The other was completely blacked out and redacted. That's an example of the kind of thing that we want to see. And the Mueller report underscores the importance of this because Mueller totally kicks the ball over to Congress and says it's up to Congress to decide whether there was obstruction of justice, whether there were high crimes and misdemeanors. That's our constitutional role. We can't run away from it.
So Speaker Pelosi, speaking several weeks ago, said that Donald Trump is not worth it when it comes to impeachment. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, a fellow Marylander like you, said yesterday that the American people will get their say in a year and a half when the 2020 election. But there are a lot of grassroots Democrats who want you and others in Congress, Democrats, to pursue impeachment. Impeachment is often regarded politically, forget the checks and balances for a second, politically as a loser. Do you think your party should pursue impeachment even if it means it damages your party?
The first thing we got to point out is what Speaker Pelosi said was that we should not pursue impeachment unless there's overwhelming evidence of a high crime and misdemeanor, and there's some bipartisan support. We need to see that the Republicans actually have an open mind about the situation rather than acting like members of a religious cult. And so far, no Republicans seem to be saying, yeah, there's serious stuff in there. I see that the president is tweeting out today that all of this is, nonsense again. He's calling it the Russia hoax when Special Counsel Mueller, whose authority he otherwise bows down to now because he found that there was no criminal conspiracy, but Mueller said that there was a sweeping and systematic campaign by Russia to sabotage our election in 2016, and now they're denying it. But look, impeachment is part of the Constitution. We shouldn't be afraid of any part of the Constitution, just like the 25th Amendment is part of the Constitution. We shouldn't be afraid of that. And I've said from the beginning, it should not be a fetish for anybody on our side, and I don't think it is, but it shouldn't be a taboo either. We need to follow the evidence where it takes us. And from my perspective, the factual gathering is just beginning right now. Remember, for 2 years, the Republicans in the Judiciary and Oversight Committee did no investigation. They said, let's wait for the special counsel report. Then they did everything in their power to undermine the special counsel, and now they're saying it's all over. They're not even reading the special counsel report.
This report is very clear. There is not evidence, prosecutable evidence, that people on the Trump team conspired with Russia to influence the election.
And I wholeheartedly accept that. Do you accept, or do others accept, the question is that there's overwhelming evidence that the president tried to obstruct justice? I mean, 10 different episodes where the president interfered to try to thwart the investigation. So, and the thing about the collusion is, they said there's no collusion, no collusion. There certainly was no criminal conspiracy, according to special counsel, and I accept that. But actually, there was clearly a convergence of interest by the Russians who were working to disrupt and sabotage our election and the Trump campaign, because the Russian counterintelligence active measure campaign was meant to get Donald Trump elected.
I was going to say impeachment in the House is a statement that the House majority would make, even if the chances of the Senate convicting, you need a two-thirds majority in the Senate, are remote, even if that. But is the House of Representatives, from your perspective, at least prepared to make that kind of statement about the president?
Well, here's the thing. The impeachment is a mixed question of law and politics. If it were a question of law only, it would have been reposed in the Article 3 branch. It would have been for the courts. But it's been given to Congress, which means we've got to look at not just did the president commit obstruction of justice or violate the Emoluments Clause or engage in other abuses of power. We have to look at that in the context of everything else we're trying to do. We just reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. The Republicans are trying to stop us on that. We passed legislation to close the gun show loophole and the internet loophole. The Republicans are trying to stop us on that. We're trying to lower prescription drug prices. So we're fighting for an agenda for America on a positive policy front. At the same time, we're trying to defend against the most lawless administration of our lifetime. So that's the challenge for us, to try to figure out how to be on offense and defense at the same time.
Congressman Raskin, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
From Washington to Wisconsin, will voters in a state key to President Trump's 2016 victory remember or care about the Mueller report of 2020? We're in 2020. We're about to go there. That's next.
Sanders, Harris, Warren, Klobuchar, Buttigieg on the same stage, back to back. Monday night, starting at 7 Eastern, only on CNN.
564 days until the 2020 election. Will this Mueller report be history for voters?
Miguel Marquez is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a state that was key to President Trump's victory in 2016. Miguel, what are you hearing from voters?
Well, look, lots of people are talking about it here in the Badger State, but few, if any, think the findings will make much of a difference to anyone.
Good morning, Wisconsin. 48 degrees at Radio City.
Release of the redacted Mueller report in Milwaukee. Talk of the town.
Obviously, the big story today, the Mueller report. The redacted version is coming out, hopefully as we speak.
It's out now.
We got it. All right.
On Conservative Talk Radio, host Steve Scafidi says he's talked to Mueller 4 to 5 times a week for the past 22 months. Now that it's out there.
For a lot of people on my side of the aisle, I think we're looking at this as, yeah, there could have been some reason to investigate this, but I think it has been hyper politicized to the point where it just went on too long.
And from caller after caller after caller, the president isn't perfect, but the investigation has gone too far for too long.
Eddie from Franklin, real quick. I only got about a minute, Eddie. What say you?
I say it's a total fishing expedition. They had a prejudgment about Trump ahead of time. They just, they don't like his character, which a lot of people don't. But, they just don't agree with his policy.
In the Milwaukee suburbs, Port Washington, in conservative Ozaukee County, where in 2016, voters supported then-candidate Trump by nearly 19 points over Hillary Clinton. Some Republican voters here say,
we're sick of hearing about it. I think Washington, they want to focus on it. Those people want to. But for us, my friends, we're sick of hearing about the Mueller.
Democrats want more details, but concede regardless of what's in the report, it's likely to make little difference in how voters view the president.
I think I've been reading about it for a long, long time, and it seems like I'm not sure anything is going to change.
Closer to downtown in blue Wauwatosa, where voters backed Clinton over Trump by 22 points. Some independent voters here say the entire report must now be released.
The full report needs to be fully disclosed to everybody so that we can read it and see what is actually.
No redactions. No redactions in the report. The full report, everything.
The full report, absolutely. We have a right to see the full report.
Some Republicans also welcoming full publication, confident there is nothing there.
If this was going to have any kind of major impact on anything,
they would have already brought indictment or charges or recommended further prosecution. So I don't think it's really going to be the big reveal like everyone thinks.
I spoke to independents, to Democrats, to Republicans that don't even like the president. The one thing across the board that they all seem to agree on, that if we're still talking Mueller in 2020 and the findings in the report, that will only improve the president's chances of being reelected. Back to you guys.
All right, Miguel, thanks very much. Robert Mueller's report confirms Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. Russia's response this morning, what interference?
Welcome back. The Kremlin is rejecting the Mueller report's outline of Russian interference in the 2016 election. A spokesperson for the Kremlin says Mueller didn't put forward any new information or evidence to support the allegations.
Mueller's report, though, not only confirmed Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election, he wrote that they did it in a, quote, sweeping and systematic fashion. Joining us now to discuss this, our CNN terrorism analyst, Phil Mudd. Phil, the president responded in a tweet this morning in response to the Mueller report. First of all, he called it the crazy Mueller report. But then he said anything the Russians did concerning the 2016 election was done while Obama was president. He was told about it, did nothing. Most importantly, the vote was not affected.
Yeah, I think if you look back at the 2016 election, by the way, of course, he's been president for 2.5 years. My first question would be, has he ever, that is, President Trump, chaired a meeting to say, what are we doing now? My guess is the answer is no. But if you look back at 2016, I think you got two issues that come up. The first is, I think history will show that maybe the administration, probably the administration, should have been more aggressive early on in acknowledging this as a problem of the American people.
The Obama administration.
Yes. I think also the flip side of that, of course, is can you imagine a conversation led by the President of the United States in, let's say, August, September of 16 saying, look how the Russians are trying to favor the Republican candidate? I mean, Obama couldn't win either way. If he decided to publicize more and talk about the intelligence, I think he would have been arguably portrayed as somebody who wanted to undermine the campaign of Trump.
So Mueller said very clearly that there is not prosecutable evidence of criminal conspiracy between members of the Trump team and the Russians. Yeah. But there are detailed in this report are a lot of conversations, outreach by the Russians, clearly determined to interfere. What's your read? What's your response to the general impression you get about how the Trump team behaved, even if their behavior was definitively, at least according to Mueller, based on what he knows, not criminal?
Boy, I'm kind of surprised at the conversation over the past day. We seem in this country to be saying if it's not illegal, it's okay. If it's unethical, that doesn't reach a bar that we should have a conversation about. I was surprised. There's been a lot of conversation, obviously, about the obstruction half of the report, at the detail, the willingness of Trump campaign members to entertain the idea that a foreign adversary could steal and then provide money. Provide information to a campaign, and then members of the campaign seemingly saying that's okay. It may not be illegal, but I can't believe 330 million Americans think that's a great way to run an election. Last thing I'd say is, and a couple members of Congress have said this already, I think there's an open question about whether we learn from this and say it is illegal even to entertain a foreign adversary or anybody from overseas, including British, French, Canadian, I don't care, with the idea that they will provide you opposition information about a candidate to interfere in elections.
So the law should be stricter?
I think it should be stricter, yeah.
The report says that about 5 hours after the president, then candidate, said, Russia, if you're listening, get the Hillary Clinton email, the 30,000 missing Hillary Clinton email. The report says, and it's very detailed, that about 5 hours after he said that, for the first time, the Russians began to follow through and try to get some of those emails.
Boy, if you look at the success of this from the spy business world, in the spy business, this is called, well known, it's called covert action. That is, we want to have a deniable operation. The Kremlin just did this today, denied it again, a deniable operation, partly through WikiLeaks, to do two things. Influence the campaign. Mueller clearly shows that covert action piece succeeded. And also sow some sort of discord within America. When you look at retweets, including by members of the campaign, about rallies that were pretty problematic during the campaign, the covert action was incredibly successful. So when I look at what the report says about the Russians responding in 5 hours and the Russians being aggressive, I look at this and say, from a covert action perspective, I would have done the same thing. Incredible success. And now Mueller says nobody broke the law. So if I'm Putin, I'm saying, well, let's do it again.
Lessons for the public, lessons for the media, lessons for politicians in here?
I'll give you a couple lessons. Number one, we need a public program from the White House to explain to the American people how to be careful going into 2020. This is not just a spy game. This is about public diplomacy. I don't think we're going to see that. The next lesson I'd offer you, which I have not seen yet from Capitol Hill, we have American companies that are under threat from spies overseas. That is people like Facebook and Twitter. They have an adversarial relationship with Congress because Congress keeps accusing them of not doing enough. How about we say maybe we should do more to protect American companies with the support of the U.S. government instead of putting them on a pedestal every time that there's a problem and hitting them with a baseball bat. We need to help them more instead of isolating them, I think, and the Congress has not been helpful.
All right, Phil Mudd, thank you so much. Appreciate it. This morning, Sarah Sanders digs in after the Mueller report calls her out for lying. What the White House press secretary